Yeah,
Nitin,
I can.
Vishwan, are you able to see the screen and hear me okay? Yeah? Let me ask this again. Nitin, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly okay.
And you're able to see the
You
screen?
can hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I'm able to see. Okay.
Thank
I'm
you.
able to see the
Vishwan,
screen.
can you see the screen and hear me okay? Vishwan, are we able to, talk? Are you able to hear me okay? Okay, he's texted me, that's fine. All right, okay, that's fine. No worries. So what we are going to do today is obviously start a very interesting unit, which is called IT and Society. I think if I look at laying down a bit of a foundation in terms of why this unit is studied and is a part of the course that we're doing, which is Diploma in Computing at Level 4. Now, I think when we look at a couple of things, if we just step back and look at a couple of things and analyze how fast technology has changed over the last few years, what we will be seeing and realizing is that the speed at which the technological advancement have actually happened, in our lifetime, have speeded up and have happened at a lightning pace post 2000. So if you see after World War II, we saw a lot of industrialization happening, which meant that a lot of people started to work within factories. As manufacturing, production, engineering side of things ramped up, it led to what is called automation. And when we look at in general automation over the years, what has happened is as gadgets, IT equipment, automation, has moved forward with the advancement in terms of new inventions, new, techniques, and new technology being invented. We have seen that this is in general helped with what is called the pace at which we adapt and consume information. So we look at things like, for example, changes which have happened from 60 to 70s, 70 to 80s, 80s to 90s, 90s to 2000, and then we look at 2000 and beyond. That is where what we will look at is that in the last 50 years, we have seen that the pace at which things, and especially in the case of technology, which have started to be used by us, have become a part of our day-to-day lives. And last but not the least, they have drastically changed the way we create, consume, disseminate, and send information. So that is what we need to understand, because this bit, which has happened in the last 50 years, has also had a profound effect on how IT and IT related systems are used within companies. So when you look at, for example, setting up a business, one of the key components that you look at, or key pillars when you set up a business, is that you look at that what would be the IT requirements, things like that we assume, things like a laptop, things like a PC, a printer. Some of these things that we take for granted, we have to do a bit of planning to ensure that these things are available when you start a new business or when you start a new, say, organization or a business or a company. Now, why this has become important? Because if you look back and you look at the pace at which things have changed, and I'll give you one simple example, which is the case of mobile phone. Now, if you look at something before before 1994, 95, we had mobile phones, but the mobile phones were as big as probably briefcases, and only a very few set of people had it. Primarily being used within the military. When we look at satellite phones and some of the other communication equipment which was used by mostly agencies like NASA, or agencies which primarily were involved in intelligence or intelligence gathering. You look at another example of how internet has changed our lives. Before 1995, there was nothing called the World Wide Web. But when Tim Berners-Lee introduced internet, or the World Wide Web, in 1995, it has transformed the way we are able to get information, send information to a certain extent, and how we consume information. So when you look at all those things, what we are looking at is that these changes which have happened in technology over the last 50 years have had a very significant impact as far as society is concerned. And that is why we look at studying this particular unit, which is IT and its impact on society in general, which is quite important to understand, the perspective of how things have changed and how IT and IT-related equipment infrastructure has actually transformed our lives. Now, going forward, we are talking about last 50 years, but just looking at a bit into the future, there's so much of IT and IT equipment now available that we are also now consciously talking about how do we recycle, how do we, when I say recycle, that means how do we reuse IT, how do we look at some of the old, IT equipment, how do we do away with it, how do we preserve the environment, what kind of effects it can have if we do not dispose of some of these, IT-related equipment in a very sturdy and ethical manner. And this can also have profound, let's put it this way, implications for us and our future generations. Now, sometimes I think this is to do with, before I get into the slides, this perspective of what IT has enabled in the last 50 years and how we are looking at IT in the future. Things like when you look at the Apple website, for example, the reason I pick up Apple is, or when you pick up Samsung phones, you look at that within the phones, there were certain hazardous chemicals which were used as long as, 5 years back. Things like arsenic, cadmium, mercury. And these chemicals or elements have now been eliminated because when you dispose your, iPhone or your Galaxy or, your smartphone, what you get to see is that some of these elements can disseminate into the environment, and these elements can cause poisoning in the water tables. So why some of these elements have now been disposed or done away with in the manufacturing of these gadgets that we use as smartphones is because when we look at the usage of technology and we look at its impact on society, what we're realizing is that over a point in time, we will see that there will be an ethical and moral use of IT and IT-related equipment with the coming in of, say, cybersecurity, cybercrime, hacking. These are things which were non-existent when we started to use IT or IT-related equipment. Things like, when I generally say IT, I'm looking at, in the last 50 years, I'm looking at a washing machine, a vacuum cleaner, a dishwasher. We're looking at anything which did automation, had a bit of programming language into it, and that allowed you or as humans for us to automate certain tasks. So a simple example of looking at that is when you go to an ATM, you go to a bank ATM, you're able to withdraw money by putting in your debit card or credit card. Now that is use of IT, but the card that you use has a bit of a code on it and has a chip on it, which basically enables password authentication and then allows you to connect to your bank remotely and withdraw money. So that is IT you see working. But when we look at in the future, what we're also looking at is, because of the advancements in IT, there are lots of, you have advantages and disadvantages. You have pros and cons. You have some bane and you have some sort of, disadvantages or negative effects of IT. And what we do get to see is that this is also having a bit of a negative impact on the societies when we look at cybercrime, when we look at hacking, when we look at some of these things which are also affecting the way people use IT-related equipment and infrastructure, which can be put to use for malicious purposes. So when you look at that, what we are looking at is that this is something that we need to understand when you are studying specifically a computing qualification. We need to be able to look at the issues which surround the use of IT, what are the ethical issues, what are the legal and regulatory issues, and how these issues are impacting the use of IT in particular by humans or by society in general. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Right? So this unit is quite important because this relates. It's not a very technical unit. It's not a unit which is primarily looking at making us understand maybe one of the key components of the qualification. When we look at programming, this database, system analysis and design, e-commerce. No, but this unit is important because this unit is going to give you some bearings on understanding what are the legal, legislation, regulatory issues, and issues which concern ethicality as far as the use of IT is concerned. So in this unit, we are going to be looking at things which are happening in and around us. We look at a lot of articles and reading which can be done from the news perspective. When you read a certain amount of news that We've had, bitcoins which were invented, and when we look at some of the things which are now happening in terms of cryptocurrency, which will be the next stage in which how IT and society will be, looking at dealing and taking on e-commerce transaction, will be directly related to this kind of a unit. And when you also look at, if I give you a bit of a broad perspective, you will also see that certain countries now have most of the social system, or most of the systems which are deployed for providing information, storing information, and retrieving information use IT. Now, it could be IT, that means IT physical infrastructure like a PC server and things like that. But in the modern context, what we're looking at is that they are going into data centers, cloud computing, wherein most of the data is stored, and you have access to a device for which you can retrieve this information. Some countries like UK, you look at UAE, you look at even in India, for example, we look at US, they have introduced something which is called the digital citizenship. That means you have a single social security number on a card, and that allows you to primarily, retrieve a number of things or services from the government or from the state. And those are the set of things which are also enabled by IT, because today there is a repository available, infrastructure available, which is able to store all this information. We are able to process this information in the background, and at a touch of a button, you're able to get these things, when you want to retrieve them. So in the earlier days, if you look at a simple example again, look at birth certificates. Say for example, if you had to apply for a passport, it used to be a paper application form. But in most countries today, you can apply for a passport or a national ID by just filling in a form online on one of the websites. And you can upload all your documents. These documents can be then stored in a particular place on a server. Once the authentication happens, you receive your passport after a certain process is done, or a digital ID, in a couple of days, straight away coming back to you. Earlier, if you recall, maybe 10 years back, 15 years back, at least for sure, when I look at, say, countries like India, developing countries, I know the passport process used to take about 2 or 3 months. You had to get a police report, you had to fill a form, send it over, go and meet in person. But now the process is probably, about 2 or 3 weeks if all the documentation is sent across correctly. So IT is having a profound impact in terms of how things are being delivered and how some of the information can be retrieved easily at the touch of a button. And this makes, our lives easier. In short, if I say, it makes lots of things easier, and that is what we're going to study in this particular unit. So the unit has 3 learning outcomes. The first learning outcome is to understand the background, why IT is significant, what are the developments which have happened in the last 50 years. The second learning outcome will look at understanding how this concept of IT and society is enabling what is called digital citizenship. That means what is the role of IT deployment when we look at the public sector, the private sector, we look at the government in particular, what kind of things can be made easily available. The usage of IT can facilitate, the retrieval of information. And then we will also understand to a certain aspect the code of ethics or legislation in particular, which has been introduced. Things like there's a lot of data being created because of IT now. So a lot of data is stored. So when you do a tweet, when you write a post on the Facebook, when you say, for example, write a comment on a website, you're creating or giving out information. Now, how this information is stored, how this information is retrieved, how it is authenticated. We look at some of the regulatory and legal issues, the codes of ethics in learning outcome 2. And in learning outcome 3, what we want to be able to understand is country-specific laws which have been put into place. So things like Data Protection Act, we will look at the ISO side of things. We look at the ISO 28000 specifically side of things, because that relates to how documentation is done, stored, and retrieved from an IT context. And then we'll also look at understanding all this with an example in terms of an application to see how an organization applies, the rules and regulations surrounding IT, the laws which have been introduced, and say, for example, in my case, I normally end up taking an example of a cyber law or a cyber security law which has been created and then, has been applied across lots of countries, wherein they observe certain basic things like when you browse a website today, 10 years back, if you remember, I don't know whether you have access to the internet 10 years back, but if you step back 5 years or maybe slightly more than 5 years, you will see that there were cookies which were accepted by websites, and the cookie used to basically store an information about the browser or the user which is actually coming to the site. But this information was not openly made available, so a lot of sites collected the data and they used that data for whatever purposes they had to. But in the last 5 years, because of the rate at which crime on the internet or on the World Wide Web is increasing, things like banking fraud and fraud related to use of credit card, debit cards in particular, you will see that if any website accepts cookie, it has to give you a choice today, an option to opt in to say that, okay, we will be collecting this and this information, and this has become a law as far as the cyber security and crime is concerned, that every website has to have a cookie, and every website has to give this option to the consumer who's coming to the website to browse. And this is where we'll understand what are the regulatory issues, how this is applied, and what are the implications of not following this regulatory issues which have been introduced and now pretty much followed across the globe, as far as cyber security or laws are concerned. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's look at covering learning outcome 1 for today. And what I've done is I've put together a few deck of slides, which I'll also be emailing after the session. And this new version will also upload onto Moodle so that you're able to access it. And along with this, I have 1 or 2 handouts which I'm going to also provide, which will allow you to do a bit of detailed reading to understand some of these, concepts that I'm going to be discussing in today's presentation. So, IT and Society, the unit, which is unit number 4.45, and today we are going to look at the first learning outcome, which is understanding how IT has changed the way people live and work. So I've got first slide, in which whatever I've spoken so far, what I've tried to do is I've tried to summarize how the pace at which the developments have happened within the IT side of things, and how we have seen advancements happening in terms of software, database, software applications, and in general, where all they are actually being used currently, from the 1960s to say 2020. So if I briefly explain this slide, look at, the mainframe computers were introduced by IBM sometime in the 1960s and 70s. And because of the vast industrialization which was happening, certain companies, competitors like Microsoft, you look at companies like IBM, you look at a lot of companies which have disappeared now, but when you had programming languages like COBOL and Pascal, they were introduced primarily to automate things, and mainframe computers which were introduced by IBM used to do certain very specific tasks. So what you had to do is you had instructions on a punch card, and these instructions were given on a punch card, and at that point in time, they used to do a certain series of steps to be able to, produce an output. In the 1980s and 90s, what we see is we had application software which was developed. In particular, when we look at in particular, which was very significant, was the Microsoft Windows. We had Microsoft Windows coming out 3.1, and that kind of moved everything from Linux or Unix interface to something called graphical user interface. And at that point in time, what we see is that the information on PCs could be easily stored, and this information on PCs could be retrieved by normal users because the interface had become, from a DOS-based or a Linux-based interface, had become a graphical user interface. In the 1990s and 2000s, we see, the proliferation of World Wide Web. We see e-commerce coming in, and at some point in time, when we saw the e-commerce coming in, we saw that a lot of .com businesses started to come in, and what we see with these .com businesses, which was specifically around the 2000 era, when we see the .com bubble bursting, but we had a lot of these companies which came in and which allowed the access to the World Wide Web in a very easier way. Now, some of us might recall, I think one of the most popular browsers at that point in time between the 1990s and 2000 was Netscape Navigator. Now, that browser was very popular. It was the market leader, but slowly and gradually we've seen other softwares which came across, which allowed with the development of HTML, Java, PHP, and Apache, it allowed the web to become much more friendlier, and it became much more, graphical user interface based. In the mid 2000s, we see, new technologies coming in like CRM. We see Salesforce, sales. When I say Salesforce, we had customer relationship management. So certain application softwares which were specific to a server or a PC started to become located in the cloud. So we had a lot of infrastructure which was developed by then, servers, data centers, things like that, and that allowed some of this data to be retrieved more easily in through some of these services like you had Amazon Cloud Services, you had VMware, some of these companies which were initially beginning in terms of developing ecosystems. So data moved from the web to the cloud. In 2010, we saw a lot of proliferation or increase in the number through which the data could be collected, stored, distributed, and that was social media. So we saw the proliferation of Facebook. Where Facebook started to grow quite quickly, a lot of other social media platforms came across, and we saw that a common man or a common user was able to interact with data in any shape or form, and was able to instantly react, and basically, when I say interact with data, and this could be done across on a number of platforms. Now we see the current era. If we talk about 2015 to 2020, we see PC is not just the only device through which you can access the World Wide Web today. So you have tablets, you have smartphones. You can see that in 2010, the iPhone was introduced in 2007. A lot of these keyboard-based phones moved to becoming touch-based or smart screen phones. Tablets were introduced, and in 2015 onwards, we see a decline of PC shipments happening across the world, and we see that there are other devices now available through which you can access the World Wide Web. So you can access them on tablets, e-readers, any sort of portable device, which is like a laptop, Mac, but also, portable devices. So your television, you can access certain apps and widgets which allow you to browse the internet, or, go onto YouTube, or, some of the other applications. So what we see is data virtualization. We see real-time usage of data happening. You are able to do banking in real time. Some of the transactions which happened, maybe, way back when you look at in 2010, 2012, 2015, you could transfer some money, but it used to reach, in 48 hours, 24 hours. So the banking system was not, on real time. But when you see today, if you transfer money, in a couple of seconds, you see the money is arriving in your account, or instantly is available in a different account, or the payment goes across. And this is all happening because of, the proliferation of infrastructure, which has made the usage of data in real time possible. And this has led to the age which is what we call the Internet of Things. That means everything today is accessible through the internet. So if you have an internet connection and you have a device through which you can access the internet or go onto the internet, you can pretty much access all the information that you require. And you see the speed at which this has transformed our lives. So if you look at 1960s, there was nothing called a PC. There was nothing called a phone or a mobile phone. There used to be a landline or a phone. But with the change of the telecom infrastructure, the invention of new products like the smartphone, tablet, apart from the PC, you see that everything is transformed, and the pace at which this is happening every 10 years, when we look at Intel and the father of Intel, when we look at, understanding when he invented the Pentium chip, he at some point in time said that every 2.5 years, the speed of the processor will double. So when he had predicted that, nobody, kind of believed him. But when you look at today's, Gordon Moore, his law, which was that every 2 years, you will see that the pace at which the processing is happening, the number of transistors that you can fit onto a core will double. And that is happening till such state. Till such state we see that this is happening. So Intel has been able to introduce, Qualcomm has been able to introduce, ARM has been able to introduce, IBM, you look at Apple, you look at, a lot of other companies which are able to produce processors. They are more energy efficient. They're able to store more information. They're able to process information much faster. And the pace at which this is happening, you look at, is tremendous. So the impact which IT is having on our lives and the way it has transformed our landscape in terms of how we use products, how do we, use or see automation happening, you will see that this has totally changed our world in the last 50 years. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Can you think of any one specific example, Nitin, that you have seen in your lifetime which has changed quite rapidly in the context of IT?
In the context of IT, telephone is the classical example. From landline to this touch screen mobile, 4G, and in upcoming days there will be a 5G.
That is correct.
Information I had said. Yeah.
That's correct. So I think very good point. When you look at 2G, 3G, 4G, and now you have the advent of 5G, which is happening, which will allow speeds of 1 kilobyte per second onto a mobile phone. So speed at which you can download a movie, in maybe 1 or 2 minutes, a complete movie can be downloaded onto your phone. Correct?
Yes.
So the pace at which, look at change happening. 5 years back, you had mobile phones. 10 years back, you had mobile phones, but you had no camera, or the memory on the phone was very less. But today you have phones which are 512, 1 terabyte memory, and it is like more than a computer in your hand.
So remember, in initial phones there is extremely limited memory for the SMS.
That is correct.
In this days, no one consider SMS even.
Absolutely correct. Now, with this understanding in mind, let's look at 1 or 2 slides. Now, the first assessment criteria that we need to look at is, it basically talks about how do we analyze significant developments in IT in the last 50 years. So if I look at this now, I think if I just specifically concentrate about talking about IT in particular, I think the key innovations that we will look at, which I don't need to explain much, would be things like an ATM. So if you look at an ATM today, it pretty much allows you to transact, do banking, withdraw money, deposit money, and this is something which is, which has changed our lives quite significantly. So access to money anywhere, anytime is definitely available, and this has been made possible with the use of ATMs. ATMs have also changed over the years. They were introduced in the 1960s, but today you have ATMs which can accept, they were bank specific or organization specific, but today you can take any card and go to any ATM and withdraw money. And this has happened because of the vast changes which have happened over the years in terms of networking, in terms of, data being available on cloud. And that's why ATMs have also become quite, sought after when you look at malls opening and when you look at large shops opening, areas or offices and things like that. Now, one of the other things that we see is the advent of electric cars. We've been seeing hybrid cars from Toyota for the last 15 years, but when you see totally electric cars being introduced, we talk about, we talk about innovative companies like Tesla in particular, but, Toyota has kind of been at it for a number of years, wherein they introduced a lot of variants, like the Prius, the Auris, for example, and you look at the Lexus series in particular. But when you look at imagining when Henry Ford introduced cars, or the first car when it was introduced in 1901, nobody thought that you could have cars which would run through batteries, or fuel which is actually stored as power in cells within batteries, and you can charge them through an electric socket. So this is a significant achievement, which we've seen, which has happened within the car industry in particular, but has a lot of IT and mechanics in it, because a lot of this involves programming. Most of the electric cars have lots of computers and computer-related equipment in them, and that is what has also allowed, the sizing. When we look at, going back to this slide, we look at IBM mainframes, which were as big as probably the size of a room or 2 rooms or a house, and the way in which the computer has shrinked and the size has become small has allowed at some stage the computing and the intense computing side of things to be integrated into a small interface, which has gone into a car and helps drive, say for example, electric cars. And now we are going to see autonomous cars coming in. That means cars or driverless cars. That means you'll be able to get some services like in the Olympics, which are going to happen in Tokyo. Tokyo will have taxis which are going to be driverless taxis. So if you land up at the airport, from the airport to the Olympic Village and some of the other venues, you'll be able to order a cab which will drive on its own. And that is something which they will, that is something which the country has pledged, that this will be an innovation that they will, 100% roll out when the Olympics happen. I think in 2020 or 2022, I think.
No, it's 2020.
Yeah. Now let's look at just briefly, recapping. So we look at technology. For example, barcodes. You have lots of products in a warehouse. You have lots of products in big shopping malls today. When you look at these, identification of the products has become quite easier with the use of barcodes. Now, barcodes were invented probably in the 1950s, but the way they have been adopted now, when you look at, say for example, a luxury car or a fast car like Ferrari. Now, a car like that is manufactured, and you have a certain number of engineers which work on certain components within the car. The way they barcode and the way they basically code the components of the the car when it is being assembled in the factory. If there is a fault which occurs, they can pinpoint back down to the engineer who assembled the engine, assembled the car, or the internal internals of the car itself. And this is possible because of the intricate technology like the RFID, the barcodes and scanners, which allow all this to be connected as a single piece of information. So when you look at that, this is again quite a advancement possible because of technology or because of IT. So some of the things that we see, you have now electronic barcodes, you have barcode readers on your smartphones, you have barcodes which are they have RFID in it. That means they have sensors built into it. You look at a particular barcode which is used in the security system as well. You go to a big shopping mall, and sometimes you will see some very expensive articles or items are put into some sort of a barcode or some sort of a spider. And in some cases, when you see there's a small security barcode on it, if you try to walk out of the mall and you go through the barriers, you will see that the barriers start beeping. And this is technology. When you look at the initial barcodes, they were introduced way back in 1950s, but you look at the electronic barcodes, which have sensors built in, and they are the size of a small strip which can be put onto a product. And if you buy and pay for it, the person at the cashier or the person at the till actually disables that by running it onto a particular device, which disables the barcode. And when you walk out with the product, it doesn't beep at the barriers. But if you try and walk out without paying for it, these same barcodes are electronic barcodes, and they are activated, and they indicate that there is a theft happening, or somebody is taking the product without paying for it. So you see the innovation in technology when it was introduced in 1950, and the way it is being used now currently in 2015, 2020. You will see that there's a lot of there's a long way which the technology has come across in terms of innovation, and from the time it was invented. We look at cell phones. I don't need to talk about this, but you will see that they were around from the 1970s. Motorola introduced the first handheld device in 1983, which was, I think, the D628. And then after that, you've seen the price at which these phones are now available. At some point in time, if I can recall, a simple phone from Samsung is about £8 in the UK. Just a simple talking phone, data phone. But when you look at smart devices now, and the ones which Huawei and Samsung are introducing, the folding phones, they're again going back to the same price tag of looking at £2,000 or $4,500 and things like that. So there are a number of innovations that we can recap, for the first assessment criteria, which basically show how significant the developments in IT have been in the last 50 years. Now, one of the ones which I want to talk about in general is GPS, the Global Positioning System. Now, when you look at this as a technology, this has revolutionized everything. When you look at smartphone, you look at maps, you look at cars, you look at, ordering taxis through Uber. Everything today uses what is called a GPS, or a signal which allows you to locate your exact positioning, where you are at any given point in time if you have a GPS device. So look at the way this technology has come across. It was invented in the 1970s or early 80s when US launched the first satellite to, put this global positioning system into place in the US. And today a network of 750 satellites provide real-time information of location, where you are, how far you are from say the nearest point, using GPS technology. And this is being currently used, for a lot of consumer or commercial purposes rather than the military purposes when it was initially introduced in the early 1980s. So without this, can you imagine, your location-based services can't run on your phone. When you check in on Facebook and you say that I'm in a particular location and you take a photograph and you put it in, the photograph gets locked with a GPS code and it locks that location in where the photograph has been taken. So you look at how it was used primarily for navigation in the early 1970s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Today, when you take a photograph from a camera, like a Canon SLR or a mobile phone, your photograph has a GPS signal locked into it. So it gives you the exact location at what place the photograph was taken, and to a precise location. It allows that photograph for you to be able to tweet, add to a Facebook, and things like that. So vast changes which have happened, we see within technology when it was introduced and how it is currently being used for commercial purposes. Is that okay?
Yes.
Now, this is something that I've kind of taken across from Ernst & Young, a report which was published by them in terms of how huge the impact of digital technologies is and how the usage of some of these products is growing. And it gives you a bit of a snapshot to say that, okay, when we look at one of the most popular games which was introduced in 2012, the Candy Crush Saga, it basically reached 100 million users or players in 1 year and 3 months. You look at Instagram, it reached 100 million in 2 years and 4 months. But if I look at the pace at which telephone, when it was introduced in 1878 by Graham Bell, it took 75 years to reach 100 million subscribers. The landline phone. You look at mobile phone, it reached that landmark in 16 years. So the time frame almost became 1/4. You look at the World Wide Web, 100 million users, halved again in 7 years. When the internet was introduced in 1995, commercially, in 7 years we had 100 million subscribers. You look at iTunes, Facebook, blah blah blah, and it gives you an idea in terms of the pace at which the technological disruption is happening, how quickly things are changing. So this graph gives you a sense of how people are using IT and how our usage of society in general, when you look at society in general, how our usage is so closely tied to IT and IT related innovations in our day-to-day lives. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Let's go to the second assessment criteria now. Here, it is asking us to evaluate how IT has changed society over the last 50 years. So I've put together 1 or 2 slides, and if you see, this is a image that basically shows that when we look at our evolution of humans in particular, in 50,000 years, we came across from Neanderthals, which were our ancestors, to the modern day man, and what we are seeing now is that everything is getting kind of used around, or everything is surrounding across the use of PC or some sort of a net-enabled device. So something somewhere is taking us back into some sort of a crutch wherein we see that the advancement in technology is also making us limited. That means we are currently becoming a lot more dependent on the use of technology. So here, in this particular bit, when we look at understanding how society is changing, we want to be able to capture a glimpse or a snapshot of how dependent we are becoming on technology. And I'll give you a personal example. If I look at 10 years back, I used to remember most of the phone numbers by heart. I used to remember most of the people's names and basic details almost at the tip of my fingertips. Now today, sometimes you don't even recall your own phone number. If I have to ask you what's your mobile number, you say, okay, hang on, give me a minute, let me go through my phone. You see your number and then you say, isn't it? So you become so dependent on technology that some of the things which we had taken for granted and we could remember them by heart, are now currently making us dependent on the use of technology. So sometimes when you look at phone numbers, sometimes when you're leaving the house, you don't look for a wallet, you don't look for your handkerchief or some sort of any other item that you carry with you, but you always make sure that you're carrying your phone with you. Is because all the information that you want, whether it's email, photographs, passwords, things like that, is all on your phone, and you can even make payments through your phone today using Apple Pay or any sort of e-pay system which is integrated with the modern day smartphones. So when we look at the changes which are happening within society and how dependent we are becoming on IT, is the bit that we need to capture in learning outcome. And some of the changes that I have pointed out are here on the slides. So one is, today, some of us do not forget to tweet or post an update on Facebook. Social networking has become so important that we will probably miss out the meal or miss out a particular activity which is more important, but we'll make sure that we update our status on Facebook, Twitter, or on Instagram. So social networking has become an integral part of our lives. We're interacting with social media on all platforms, whether it's PC, at home, at work, on the phone, whatever it is, we're using social media quite extensively. The other example that I would put forward would be e-learning. Could you imagine 10 years back that you'll be learning, or doing a course through, through distance learning, but using technology like, webinars? Was that something that you ever thought of would be possible?
No, it is not possible.
So when we look at this, what we do get to see is that e-learning has also become possible because of technology. So these are some of the advancements that I've captured, which allow you to understand. Just one second. Which basically allow you to understand, that how we see dependence on technology happening as far as we are concerned. So some of the other points that I've mentioned here is online shopping. You look at job. You look at 10 years back, 15 years back, when you had completed your qualification or your schooling, you at some point in time went to a traditional agency with a copy of your CV and your documents, your educational documents, and you applied for a job. Now today, that is something that you don't do at all. You do it online, and online job search, shopping. When you look at buying anything, you want to do a bit of research before you want to buy. It's all being done using online shopping. So you go onto Flipkart, Amazon, you look at some of the other sites through which you go through, and what you do is even before you buy the product, what you're looking at doing is basically doing research online. And, sorry. And this is where you're primarily looking at, this is primarily, which is where you're looking at, how you're looking at using technology to a large extent. So when we look at our dependence in terms of usage of technology, what we do see is social networking becoming important, e-learning becoming important, shopping, which is now transforming the landscape. A lot of us now buying things online rather than going to the traditional shops. There is no way that we are looking at buying things and paying for it at the shop, which is what we feel is available cheaper and easier, online. Now, one or two other things that we look at is, again, if you go back a number of years, we do see that we used to get news or news-related updates, once or twice or 3 times a day. Today, you have news available round the clock. And the reason why we say this is you have news coming across the internet, you have news coming across on the TV, the radio, a lot of other different types of devices. And this allows you to consume or get the news that you want primarily through the digital medium. If you see newspapers, this used to be one of the things which we do see is actually going out. A lot of people have stopped buying newspapers, books, because they feel that some of these things are electronically now available. and the easy access to these things to the electronic medium has made it easier for us to consume, get, and read information. One of the things that you will also realize would be continuous connectivity. And what I mean by saying continuous connectivity here is that today, if I again step back, maybe 10 years back, 20 years back, excuse me, what we had was something called a dial-up modem. So if you had to connect to the internet, you were basically dialing in using a PSTN line, and that PSTN line allowed you to connect to the internet or a particular server, like in BSNL in the case of India, for example, or BSNL, and that allowed you to get onto the World Wide Web. Now today, if you compare that with the access which is available, you have fiber internet, you have speeds of 3G, 4G, 5G available in different places, and you're always connected at a click of a button, able to go onto the internet. So continuous connectivity allows you to retrieve, store, create, and disseminate information at a rapid speed. And this is something which is one of the biggest changes that we've seen over the years, which is currently come across in our day-to-day lives. So some of these points that I've discussed allow us to primarily look at how technology, in particular IT, has changed the way we use, and consume information in the last 50 years. Now, some of these things have happened in the last 4 or 5 years. Some of this have happened in the last 15, 20 years. But the speed and the change at which it is, rate of change at which it is happening is increasing, is becoming shorter. So when I looked at, referring back to that particular diagram, of this snapshot, what we do see that in order for that particular equipment or the usage to reach 100 million users was a number of years. And if we look at today, when we look at Facebook reaching 1 billion and then Facebook reaching 2 billion, it took maybe 15 years or 17 years for Facebook to reach 1 billion users, but it has already touched the milestone of 2 billion users in about 3.5 years after it reached 1 billion. So the speed at the rate at which and the speed at which the change is happening quite quickly because of continuous connectivity. A lot more people now have access to the World Wide Web and the connectivity, which allows them to interact, use some of this infrastructure, and that has made things quite possible. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Now let's look at the last learning outcome in particular, which is looking at understanding the way in which IT has changed our lives or transformed our lives. Right? Now, when we look at this in particular, what I've done is I've put together a few important points. So when we look at the impact and in terms of how technology is essentially changing the way we basically use IT, this is what we need to cover in the last context. So how is it affecting me on a day-to-day basis? How it is making things easier for me on a day-to-day basis. Now, a simple example that I would give you here is that I have to do a class. For me, doing a class is just a click a few buttons because I have access to a webinar software like JohnMe. I use a Mac to basically use PowerPoint or a software called PowerPoint, which allows me to make presentations. And last but not the least, the PC or the Mac that I'm using has an interface built in for a video and also for a microphone, which allows my voice, my screen, and the availability of the internet or the connectivity that I'm talking about allows all this possible to be viewed thousands of miles or kilometers across at your end and at Rishwin's end to be able to join me on this particular session. So for me as a teacher, technology has made things easier because I don't need to write notes, I don't need to use a whiteboard, or in some cases, I don't need to create notes which have to be physically printed out and then sent across to the learners or handouts to be given. But I can all do this the use of some sort of IT. whether it's a PowerPoint software, whether it's a PC or a Mac, whether it's internet, the webinar software, and it is making my life as a teacher quite easier or easy on a day-to-day basis. So what we need to look at in the third part is primarily to understand how the use of IT. You could pick up any particular, say, device. You might pick up a mobile phone, you might pick up a PC or any other device that you feel you're comfortable with. And what you have to do in this is explain how this is making, life for you easier. Maybe at work, maybe at school, maybe at, home. And that is what we need to capture in learning outcome 3. So what I've done is I've put together 3 or 4 slides, and I'll basically just explain what I've done. So in this case, when I look at impact of technology, talking to friends face-to-face was quite important. But today I can talk to friends face-to-face using what is called, FaceTime. I can do a video call on the phone, and I can also do Skype. So this allows me to talk face-to-face as far as, interaction with my friends is concerned. But a couple of years back, if you look at, we did not have the option to do face-to-face time, or video conferencing was not available because the internet connectivity did not support, the transfer of image and voice simultaneously. But today it is possible. So you can see me, you can hear me, and you can also see my screen. It is all made possible because of the internet connectivity and the connectivity strength, which is fiber internet, which allows all this to happen simultaneously. So today when you take a photograph, you're on a holiday, you want to share that with your friends and family, you post it on Facebook, or you post it on a platform which has access to the other, your friends and family. Instantly it allows you to share photographs using that medium. So what we see is that it has made things easier for us, but the caveat in this is, or the negative drawback in this is, that a lot of the information that you post out is also publicly available to other users who are not a part of your network, and they have access to this information as well. So sometimes when you see the recent discussions with Facebook, fake news, and the privacy around the whole area of information is now being currently rewritten into a code of some sort of a code or a law, wherein Facebook now allows you to choose what kind of things you want to share, can share, and what kind of things people can see and they can use within the company, so that it gives you enough control on your own privacy, wherein you are then allowed to determine what kind of data or information can be shared with your friends, with your family, with friends of friends, and things like that. So excuse me. So in this case, what you see, that technology has made things easier, but it is also making things difficult, wherein some part of your information which is meant for your friends and family only is available to other users, and that is where the control of privacy is coming in. Now, this particular thing that I put together is primarily relating to an example of what we call, Facebook itself, because of the recent things which have happened, in terms of, say, for example, fake news, in terms of the American elections which happened, 2 years back, wherein there are claims of rigging and things like that. And when we look at the role of one of the UK companies which was later acquired by Facebook, and how they use location-based services to influence voters to be able to give vote to the Democrats as against Republicans, things like that. When you look at this, look at the impact of privacy and why privacy has become so important as far as the information is concerned. So here, the impact of technology, what we are looking at is some of the lesser known impact, which is negative impact of technology, which it can have on our lives as far as data sharing is concerned, as far as our privacy is concerned. And that is what I related into 3 different slides. So what we are talking in general personally, then we are talking in terms of how your family and your workplaces are affected, and then people who are, say, for example, studying in education, school, colleges, or other kind of institutions or associations, like when you work within a hospital or a factory, how this information can be misused to basically, gain advantages, and how it can actually influence on a day-to-day basis, your working lives. And in the last slide, what I tried to do is basically give you some pros and cons or advantages and disadvantages of technology when we look at technology at this scale. So the good part is that you're able to instantly, when again going back to the example of Facebook in particular, because here what you have to do is explain it from an example to show that how it is impacting your life. So the good part is, when I took the example of Facebook, is that it allows you to share experiences instantly. If you're on a holiday, you've taken a few nice snaps, you can straight away share it with your friends and family by posting it onto this video. Now, Facebook as a social networking service, SNS, or a social networking platform, allows you to, network with a lot of people. Now, this network allows you to meet, obviously expand your friend circle, family, friends, and it's quite easy because what it does is the software has algorithms which gives you suggestions of your friends, which could be coming from your school, your college, your workplace, your family, your extended family, and all you have to do is accept their invites. It allows you to build your network. Now, the other advantage is that this platform is quite easy to interact with and use. It's quite friendly. You don't need much of training. Download the app, you get onto it, create an account, add a few friends, and it is self-explanatory. So the usage is quite easy in terms of getting to use this platform. Facebook is totally free. There is no cost attached to it, until unless you use it for commercial businesses like advertising and other bits. But Facebook is totally free. So when you look at using some of these things because of technology, you do find that there is no cost associated in particular with this particular usage of platform. Now, when we look at the long-term disadvantages of this, there are a few. One of the things that we do see is addiction. We do see that a lot of people are getting addicted to social networking or social media in particular. They are, spending lots and lots of screen time using, devices to access this media, whether it's smartphone, tablets. So this is having a negative impact on children in particular because they are getting addicted to YouTube, Facebook, for example, a lot of these online channels, which basically mean that it can have long-term negative impacts on society. Things like weaker eyesight, less development in terms of personality, and when you look at kids in particular. And what it is also doing is it is shortcutting some of the things which you will learn traditionally. Say, for example, communication. How do you communicate with friends, family, your peers, your superiors? These things are blurring lines is what you see when you look at communication. So because you have access to it instantly, what you're doing is you're instantly reacting rather than thinking and, and then communicating. So communication to a certain extent, is also, having an impact because of the consumption of this media. And last but not the least, what we are seeing is that people, and this is a practical example, you see that you have a family sitting on on the dinner table. What you will see is that people have their phone devices with them throughout, and they are more interested in going through an update or a status update which is coming in rather than having a face-to-face interaction, the parents with their family when they're sitting on a table. So the quality of interaction that this is, having in terms of the detrimental impact of the interactions that it is having on face-to-face interactions which you used to do is no longer happening. So today what you do is you're in your room, your sister's in your room, your parents are in your room, and when they give you a call, can we come sit down and have some family time together? What you're seeing is that more and more people are getting more engaged with the use of social media rather than spending family time. So you're able to meet with your parents. In the olden days, you used to go out and meet your parents on a face-to-face basis, go and meet them at their home. But nowadays, a phone call or a FaceTime is good enough to say that, okay, I've had this interaction with my parents, or, I met them this week, and that's it. So what we do get to see is that the usage of technology is reducing the social interaction which people used to have when we look at different aspects, whether it's families, friends, work, relationships, and things like that. So this particular aspect of understanding with a few slides, what we want to be able to do is understand the impact which technology is happening on a day-to-day basis on your personal life. And here is what I would suggest is you need to take an example and then basically, do this task. Is that okay?
Yes.
Good stuff. So any questions on today's session?
No questions, sir.
Right. So what I'm going to do, Nitin, apart from this, and Rishi, apart from this, is I'm going to send you a copy of this presentation, and then I've got one or two handouts which I want to send across. And these handouts will be a good read for you to, primarily look at understanding, how technology has changed, business. So, for example, this particular handout that I'm going to send across, will summarize the effects of technology and, how it has changed over the last 50 years. So this is directly related to this particular slide, which will also help you do your assignment. How technology has changed business or conduct business. And I've taken just the business aspect of it rather than professional and personal aspect to explain the effect of technology on 50 years. That's the first thing that I'm going to send. The second one that I'm going to send across is something which is summarizing the learning outcome 1, which talks about how changes have happened as you've grown, and how you see IT being introduced within the society. So this is an article which kind of summarizes some of the slides that I've used to put together to explain how things are changing at a rapid pace because of the advent of technology and, the availability of technology. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
That's fine. So these two will help you in particular to, cover up learning outcome 1, and that is what I'm going to send across just after this session. So let me stop recording now.